We are now recording. All right, everybody, welcome back to Through Eternity TE Talks podcast. It has been a while. After the pandemic, things kind of exploded. So everyone here, we've been all very, very busy making sure the tours would be running correctly for the overwhelming tsunami of people that were returning to Rome. And finally, of course, with what has been going on recently in history, I felt like it was the need for us to acknowledge a lot of great events that have happened, sad events as well. Always it's the best of times, it's the worst of times of Charles Dickens and Tales of the Two Cities. I like to quote out a lot. It's still going on. A thing that I wanted to talk about is that we have a guest here, Rachel, who is joining us. Ciao, Rachel.
Hi, nice to be here. Thank you.
Oh, it's a great pleasure to have you. So let's just clarify why we are talking right now, why I've decided to restart the podcast, because on April 21st of 2025, during the Jubilee Holy Year, unfortunately, on Easter Monday, or Pasquetta, as the Italians would say, Pope Francis passed away after a long struggle with health. It was really kind of shocking, I think, to everybody that he seemed to be doing better, and he was giving the Urbi et Orbis blessing on Easter Sunday and made an appearance up in the balcony in the facade. And so I kind of thought to myself, wow, he's doing a lot better. I'm not sure if you were thinking the same thing, Rachel, but then the next day.
I was. I mean, it was really amazing to see him up on the balcony. I mean, obviously he'd spent 6-8 weeks in hospital. He went into hospital on February 14th, and he was only discharged just before Holy Week. And I was reading that his doctors had told him, it's like bed rest now for 2 months. But Francis was determined to lead the church through Holy Week. So yeah, he was out and about, and made that final trip around St. Peter's Square in the Pope Mobile and everything, even after he delivered his Urbi et Orbi speech from the Loggia. So it was a shock. I mean, he clearly looked unwell, but I was still shocked on Easter Monday when I got the news.
Yeah, it was very shocking and very sad. So, of course, when you have a pope pass away, the papacy, for many, mmany people, it's a very unique position. And I think a lot of people are fascinated by what happens, even if you're Catholic, but it doesn't even matter if you're Catholic or not. I think the eyes of the world, I was always saying, was kind of focused on the Vatican City about what's going on. Because when you think about the role of the Pope, for many, many centuries, he was a king, and he still very much is a political figure that has every head of state, including the President of the United States, come to visit the Pope when they come to Rome. So it's still an amazing thing, and it's something that's been handed down more or less since we have Peter the Apostle, who is a patron saint of Rome, be technically the first Pope. And you have this kind of situation where they are elected. So this is a position that is a temporal power. And you have a whole series of rituals that are going through. Now, before we get into the nitty gritty about this, I'd like to clarify why I have our great specialist, Rachel, come in to talk with us. Now, Rachel has studied ancient history, or archaeology, art history, and then also you studied theology at Trinity College. Trinity College,
yeah.
Trinity College, which is one of the most, if not the most prestigious college of higher learning in Ireland, correct?
Yes. I was very lucky to spend many happy years there.
There we go. Did you get to take a look at the Book of the Kells?
Yeah, it was great actually. As a student and even as an alumni, I am actually able to go and see the Book of Kells for free, no less.
Oh, very
one of the perks.
You're very privileged. Well, you've earned it. One of my favorite things we do at Through Eternity Tours is the Uffizi Gallery in Florence. If you want to understand the Renaissance, not just see it, but feel it, this is where you go. We're talking Botticelli, Da Vinci, Caravaggio, but more than that, it's about the context. Why was this art made? What does it mean? Our guides are incredible. They bring the whole thing to life. You walk in a visitor, you walk out completely changed. That's what we're about at Through Eternity Tours, turning great sights into unforgettable stories. And the other thing about this, which is great with Rachel, is along with all of this stuff, she has been writing blogs and doing our newsletter because of this background that she has. But she also like me, is a guide. She has been a guide of the Vatican for over 10 years. This was a while ago. You're no longer living in Rome, but you're still very much connected and present to everything that's going on. And so I thought this would be a great way to talk about it. So Rachel, why don't you tell us a few things, because you guys, the team, but mostly you have written a lot of wonderful blogs that you can see on through Trinity.com about the conclave, many, many different articles. So why don't we talk about a few of those things, like when a pope dies, there are certain procedures, rituals that take place. So why don't we talk about that first and foremost?
Yeah, so when a pope passes away, a set of procedures and rituals are automatically triggered within the Vatican and within the government of the Vatican. So immediately when he dies, somebody called the Camerlengo is called upon. So the Camerlengo, he's usually a bishop, and he kind of translates as the Pope's Chamberlain.
Yes.
And he's the de facto kind of guy in charge when the Pope dies. It's his job to ascertain and confirm the Pope's death. Now we have modern medicine. The doctor obviously confirms his death.
Sure.
Camerlengo is the one who has to kind of, sign off on it. He will also be responsible for the symbolic destruction of the Fisherman's ring. So this is a very famous ring that all popes wear. It's a symbol of his power. Not so much now, but of course back in the Middle Ages and during the Renaissance, it was also used to seal official documents.
Exactly.
So it's very important symbolically and practically to prevent fraud back in the Renaissance.
Yes. Now they have other ways to do fraud with like Chat GPT or AI.
Exactly. We're in the digital age, but still, like the destruction of the Fisherman's ring, it is symbolic because it represents, the end of that Pope's authority. So the Vatican then enters into an interregnum period, so between reigns, and they call it the sede vacante, so the empty seat.
Yes.
And then it's talking about the empty seat of the Bishop of Rome.
There we go. Let me ask you just a couple of things I want to point out, because we know you and I may know a lot about this stuff, or I'm assuming that I don't know for sure, is, when it's called the Fisherman's Ring, because Peter was a fisherman, right? That was his
He was a
role.
fisherman, originally by trade. And, in the Gospels, I can't remember the exact section of the Gospel that it is, but Christ tells Peter and the apostles that you will now be fishers of men's souls.
Yes.
So it's that metaphor, and that's why he still wears the fisherman's ring.
That's what I always find it fascinating, to keep it down to the tradition. Let's also talk about rumors that have been dispelled by your blog. People used to say that there was a hammer used to tap the Pope's head to see if he was dead or not, but that is not. That's connected to opening a holy door in the Jubilee.
Yeah, so this is a really strange tradition, and I think a really strange myth, and because it sounds so bizarre, it's something that just gets repeated during every conclave. The idea that they call out the Pope's Christian name, his birth name, okay, which they do apparently actually call out his birth name 3 times when he dies, and if he doesn't answer, he's dead. But then this also became connected to this tradition that they used to tap on the dead Pope's head 3 times with a silver hammer to prove that he was dead. We're not entirely sure where this rumor came from. It seems to have cropped up around the 19th century, possibly because people were afraid of being buried alive, I
think there wasn't that a quote of Charles Dickens writing about being buried alive.
You get a lot of the kind of, in the 19th century, you get a lot of this Gothic kind of,
yes,
and stuff like that. So, this is where a lot of this is kind of probably coming from. But it also, we think, or some scholars think, it could have gotten mixed up with the rites for opening a holy door. And funny enough, we're actually in a holy year right now. But traditionally, to open a holy door, the Pope would have a silver hammer, and he would knock on the closed holy door 3 times and then push the doors open to signal the beginning of the holy year. They don't use the silver hammer anymore because of a little accident that happened with, I think it was Paul VI, when he opened the holy door, and a piece of masonry kind of actually almost squished the Pope. So they decided for health and safety, they would actually simplify the rites, and they don't actually use the hammer for that anymore either.
One thing we've learned at Through Eternity over the years is timing makes all the difference, especially at the Vatican. Our early morning Vatican tour gets you in before the crowds, when the museums are quieter and the light hits just right. You'll have the chance to really take in the Sistine Chapel, the Raphael rooms, and the ancient sculpture galleries, with a guide who brings it all to life. We wrap up with an escorted entry to St. Peter's Basilica, so you can skip the line and explore it at your own pace.
Hammer has never been used to confirm the death of a pope.
Of course not. Yeah. But what's always fascinating with me, Rachel, is whenever, because we kind of communicate on WhatsApp, we have the marketing team that we're both a part of, and I'm like, where did we have this story? And so you pop it up, you show the video, and it's amazing when we see Paul VI trying to open the door, and then the concrete just falls a little bit, just enough to say, like, right in front of his face, so everyone's kind of like
missed him by centimeters. You know, I mean, that would have been quite the start to a holy year.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it was wisely decided for health and safety to take the masonry down now, like a couple of days beforehand. So there's no kind of masonry behind the holy door anymore.
Yes,
before
exactly.
They open it.
They do it way ahead of time.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, it's funny. I think they even, I mean, I don't know. So in that video, he was outside the church and the front of it was covered in concrete. But I think what happens now is when the door shuts, it's the back doors that it's covered in concrete. Because I've only seen the back door, but I've been in Rome since '97.
And I think this was for the holy year of 65?
75.
Was it 75? Okay, when there was the falling masonry.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, Paul VI was 1963 to 1978, I believe. He's just been sainted as well. Not just been, but recently sainted.
Yeah, by Francis.
By Francis. Yeah, Francis put a bunch of popes, because before Francis, the popes that were saint, like the last pope that was sainted was Pius X in the early 20th century. And then he kind of got Paul VI, John the 23rd, John Paul II.
Yeah.
So it's a lot. It's a lot going for it. Anyways, so getting back on track. So then what they do is they kind of seal. This is what happens with tour guides. We talk about this all the time. So when they sealed the papal apartments, and I think they sealed the papal apartments with a ribbon, right? The Vatican News website was being very transparent. They kind of showed a lot of these procedures. They filmed them for us.
Much more than ever before.
Yeah, exactly. It was really cool. You know, I know people are like, Rob, stop getting so excited about the death of a pope. I'm not excited that Pope Francis died. He was a wonderful person, but to see these rituals come to life again that have been going on for over
to see this history in the making is just, you know, as a historian, absolutely fascinating. So yeah, I mean, they seal the doors to the papal apartments, and they seal it with a ribbon and then with a wax seal. So again, very traditional.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, ironically, or maybe these producers of the film Conclave were thinking, this is the right moment. I mean, how would anybody know that the Pope is going to die, when the Pope is going to die? And they did this film that was a huge success. I think it was one of the top contenders for Best Film of the Year by the Oscars. It did not win.
No.
But you know, the debate, and we did a lovely Instagram post on it that's also on our platforms on YouTube and TikTok about, you know, what is the difference in Conclave, the movie, compared to real life. And that, I think you and I were talking about a lot of the stuff they got pretty accurately. I mean,
procedurally, that movie is actually quite accurate. You know, I mean, yes. But they frame it more as a political thriller, and they kind of leave out the spiritual aspect of electing a new pope, you know. And I think that would probably be the biggest criticism that, you know, devout Catholics would maybe kind of level against that film, you know, because you don't really see the cardinals praying all that much.
No.
You know what I mean? And, you know, a huge aspect of Conclave, and part of the reason for the secrecy of Conclave, is not just to avoid political interference from the outside, but it's to allow the cardinals to be in prayer so that they can receive the inspiration from the Holy Spirit.
Yes.
And that's what's supposed to lead them to the new pope, you know? Yeah. So yeah, the movie misses that out. But procedurally, I mean, they really did do their homework.
Yeah. That's good. People are like, oh, but all that political machinations didn't really happen, da 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 da. But I'm like, well, if you look in the
To
history,
your point.
there's a lot about it. I was going through, and I believe I have my notes too, so don't. But we have the most infamous or famous conclave that happens, right? Well, we'll get to the conclave in a second. We'll talk about those fascinating ones. But what we have is that the Pope passes away, and then we have his funeral that takes place, I think, within a certain amount of days. Now, what I was confused about, maybe you can clarify for me, because they also talk about a period of mourning, the novum or noven dialis, so the 9 days of mourning. Now, does those 9 days of mourning happen from the day of the funeral or from the day that the Pope dies?
So the funeral of the Pope usually happens between 4 to 6 days within the death of a Pope. Then you enter the Novem Dialis. So that's your 9 days of official mourning, where you have these kind of extra masses that go on. We saw some of them in the Rosary happening in places like Santa Maria Maggiore, where Francis is now buried, in John and Lateran, the official cathedral of Rome, and of course in St. Peter's Basilica. So you have the 4 to 6 days. You have the funeral, then you have your 9 days of mourning, and then conclave starts. Conclave has to start somewhere between 14 and 20 days within the death of a Pope.
Okay, great. Yeah, so he died on the 21st. The funeral took place on the 26th, so that was 5 days after. 22nd, and then the conclave started on the 6th. So that's
on the 7th.
like right on
They
9.
entered on the 7th.
Hmm?
They entered on the 7th, I thought.
No, it was the 6th was Tuesday night, and then the election was on the 7th, I believe. Am I wrong? I don't know.
I have to go check mine.
I think it was because no, you're right.
They entered a day later because the 6th is the anniversary of the Swiss Guard. Yeah, so they entered on Wednesday because he was elected on. Yeah, they entered on the Wednesday the 7th, and they elected him by Thursday the 8th.
You're right. I was up in Venice.
I was arguing with my husband about this. He was like, no, they'll definitely start conclave on the 6th. And it's like, they won't start conclave on the 6th because that's the day the Swiss Guard swear their allegiance to the Pope.
Oh, well, lovely. I mean, for those of you who don't know, of course, many of you don't know, Rachel's husband is Ian, who also works with the company, who also is a guide, archaeologist.
Yeah, so both of us just argue about history and archaeology all the time.
Yeah, so you guys have these debates, but that's probably why you have such a great connection with the two of you. But, yes, that's right. So it's the 7th. Okay, I was away in Venice on the 6th, and then I was worried, and then I was like, oh God, I don't know if I should cancel my trip because I don't want to miss this. What's going on? Because
You made it.
I made it just in time. I wasn't there for the evening. We had Connor out there in the evening, and then we had I came out the day after, and I had Sandro and Lorenzo. Well, Sandro in the morning, and then I went and had lunch. It was timed perfectly, and then came back in the evening.
We call it the ultimate Colosseum tour for a reason at Through Eternity Tours. This isn't just about seeing the Colosseum. It's about feeling the roar of the crowd, the fear of the gladiators, the wild spectacle of blood and power that played out in antiquity's greatest arena. Our expert guide takes you to the Colosseum, through the Roman Forum and up the Palatine Hill, the seat of emperors and the birthplace of Rome. We bring you face to face with temples, triumphal arches, and the lavish ruins of imperial palaces. But more than that, we give you the stories, the context, the drama. It's ancient Rome at its most human, raw, and unforgettable. If you want more than just a quick photo and a fact or two, join us at Through Eternity Tours.
So let's get back to this. So the Pope, the funeral passes, then we have the conclave. So what the conclave means is conclave, so it's with keys. Symbolically, They're supposed to be locked in, and then they're supposed to have very simple living conditions. It's not supposed to be very comfortable for them because there's a bit of a rush on wanting to elect a pope based on history. And that's where I get to that interesting stuff that the nitty gritty, because, and by the way, people don't realize, but the conclave didn't always happen in the Sistine Chapel. The Sistine Chapel was built in 1475. The first conclave that took place in it was 1492, and it wasn't even always there. They were having conclaves in the Quirinal Palace. later on in the early 19th century, I believe. Anyway, but to just get back to this, so in Viterbo, they had a lot. There was the papacy was in Viterbo for a while because things were kind of very unpleasant in Rome.
Rome was a bit sketchy.
Yeah, it was a bit sketchy. I always think of that time as like nostalgic thing. Oh, it's about like, the Red Keep and Game of Thrones, all these like factions of noble families fighting each other.
Yeah, I mean, this is how you get all of these kind of towers being built in Rome, and the city's just been run by these, various kind of warring families. It wasn't a safe place to be.
Yes.
So and traditionally, the process of electing a pope, even before it becomes the conclave that we know it as today, where you elected the pope wherever the last pope died, and the pope was spending most of his time in the papal palaces in Viterbo, which is, it's still in the province where Rome is. It's still in the province of Lazio, but it's several kind of miles outside the city. About, was it 30 miles or so outside of Rome?
Yeah, exactly. And I'm such a nincompoop because, I've lived in Rome for so long. I've been to Viterbo, but of course, I love, medieval papal architecture. And, to add on to this, the popes were in Viterbo for a while. Then they eventually had to go up to Avignon, right? The Avignon residency.
Yeah, so we've had popes elected in France as well. Yeah,
exactly. And but these papal palaces still exist, whereas most of the medieval papal architecture in Rome has been pulled down or built up again, right? So we don't really have that many examples. I can't even think of come to mind of real, medieval papal architecture in Rome. You may be able to figure it out, but I can't remember. But so
I really want medieval architecture in Rome, but you don't but you don't have the big papal palaces because so the popes originally used to live over at the Lateran Palace.
Yes.
Way before they, lived in the Vatican, they lived over at the Lateran. This is land that was gifted by the Emperor Constantine to the church. And so that's where the first papal palaces were. But especially during the Avignon papacy, so when the popes are living in France, there's earthquakes, there's fires, the Lateran palaces, they're in a really sorry state, which is actually how the popes end up moving over to Vatican Hill when they come back to Rome.
Oh yeah, gosh, we could even do like a whole series about that because I always love St. Peter's Basilica because it was really the basilica for the emperors, not really for the popes. That was St. John of Lateran. So, but that's another story.
That's a whole other podcast.
Oh yes, exactly. If I was going to say though, if you do want to have an idea of what the papal palaces look like, the medieval palaces, you'd have to go to see a fresco. I think it's the Carafa Chapel is the name in Santa Maria sopra Minerva, the church that's not that far away from the Pantheon. You can very much look on the frescoes by Filippino Lippi, and you can see where the original place of the statue of St. Marcus Aurelius, the ancient statue, and behind you have the painting of the medieval palaces of the popes at St. John of Lateran. I know, guys, this may be a little bit more in details, but this is like the stuff that I love that always makes things connected. So now we have this up in Viterbo, and this conclave lasted for 3 years. And as almost 3 years. Okay,
2 years, 9 months.
Just round it up. Okay, fair enough. Okay, so we have almost 3 years, but it was only 18 cardinals that were voting as opposed to 133 cardinals that were voting for this conclave that just
it's the biggest conclave in history.
Biggest conclave in the history, and the most international conclave as well.
Yeah.
That's the other thing that's it's so effective in the world, and that's why the conclave is such an amazing thing for me, I think, and for many, many other people, because it really does affect things in the world. When John Paul II was voted Pope, right? It was the first time that they're having a non-Italian Pope in almost 500 years.
Oh, that's 500.
And he was from what was considered the Soviet Union. And a lot of people thought that he was a catalyst for the fall of the Soviet Union. Absolutely. So it does have not just spiritual meaning for many, many of the Catholic believers in the world, but it has great ramifications politically in the world.
It does. I mean, the Pope isn't the political figure that he was during the Renaissance and the Baroque era. Yes. He's not this king-like figure in the way that he was, but they do still hold, very real soft power. They wield soft power, and they can be very, very instrumental in terms of helping to hammer out peace agreements the world over. And we're in a period of huge conflict in the world right now. And a lot of people are saying that with the choice of Leo XIV, he's a moderate, he's a bridge builder. And this might be part of the reason why he was elected, the fact that he might be able to actually kind of wield that soft power to help resolve some of these world conflicts. Some of his first words, of course, on the balcony of St. Peter's that night when he came out was about peace.
Yeah, it was very beautiful.
Yeah, so that might give people an indication as to the direction that he wants to take his papacy in then as well.
Yeah, sure. It was very, very beautiful and also very needed, I think. And I think a lot of people appreciated it.
There's this incredible moment we created through Trinity Tours, when the light goes on inside St. Mark's Basilica, and it's just your small group standing in silence beneath a ceiling of gold. It's after hours, no crowds, just the sound of footsteps and the glow of 8,000 square meters of mosaics lighting up around you. It's one of those rare travel experiences that actually stops time. You feel it in your chest. And that's why we do what we do at Through Trinity Tours, for moments that stay with you long after you've left.
So, but getting back with John Paul II when he was elected, and then we have the person that he kind of really put his want and volition of saying probably they wanted Cardinal Ratzinger to become Benedict XVI. But then, what happens is that he was having challenges that he faced. I think some people were saying he wasn't a great manager. I don't know. But then he decided, and this is another thing. So we're talking about these amazing events that are happening since 1978. Benedict resigns. And that's another event of a pope not resigning for almost 500 years. And
that was crazy.
Francis elected, and Francis is the first pope that, he was he was revolutionary in ways when he was elected. Maybe didn't think he would be rocking the boat the way he did. First of all, he doesn't have the famous kind of stole fabric covering over his shoulders because he thought that those pieces of cloth were too ostentatious. And he's a Jesuit. No Jesuit had ever been elected pope.
No.
And the bold name, he was just, when you say Francis, it's for those who know, we're talking about Benedict XVI, John Paul II, or John the 23rd, there are always these numbers. I don't know if people realize, have you heard a different story? But I always thought it was the papacy, the popes changed their name because there was a pope named Mercurio.
Yes.
And he didn't want to have a pagan name, so then he changed.
Yeah, he thought it was, bad PR for the church. It's like, hey, I'm Pope Mercury, named after a pagan god. So he thought, yeah, you know what, I might change my name. So I think he became, what was it, John II?
Yeah, probably John II. But then there's also, isn't it Simon was changed the name to Peter? But but that's just me thinking about it. But absolutely, yeah. That's the reason why.
Yeah. So they don't have to. It's not kind of canon law or and that they have to change their names, but it is tradition.
That's right.
And the name that they choose again will kind of give you an idea of what kind of papacy they are going to have. It'll tell you a lot.
Absolutely. And also tradition doesn't say, tradition happens that mostly it's from the College of Cardinals that a pope is elected. But even in that infamous, 2-year, 9-month conclave that went on, it wasn't a cardinal that was elected. It was somebody else who was nearby and became Gregory X. That's what I learned rereading my blogs, apparently. So it's people don't, technically anyone, they have to be Catholic and they have to be.
You have to be male, baptized, and Catholic. Yeah. To be elected to the papacy. But those are technically the only requirements. That said, the College of Cardinals haven't chosen from outside their ranks in hundreds of years, and it's always, or almost always, the person who is in the Sistine Chapel.
Yes.
They
Exactly.
could technically elect somebody outside the Sistine Chapel, but it hasn't happened in a long, long time.
Yeah, that's also kind of the startings of schisms and stuff like that, because that's what I was reading, preparing for this discussion, like Urban VI from Naples. The people were surrounding the conclave. There was a conclave going on in Rome, and so they're like, we want a Roman to be a pope. And they said, let's compromise and get this Neapolitan. And apparently he was not a great pope, and they tried to revoke their election of him. That's when we have the pope and the anti-pope. He became Clement, a new pope was like Clement V. But all that stuff gets kind of confusing. But so we have here now the conclave has started, and they are put in with keys. Now, it used to be that they would have like these kind of cots set up in the museums where they would sleep. And you even brought up the toilets, which I thought
I mean, they are roughing it. So, conclave, it comes from the Latin, as you said, conclave, with key, and they are literally locked inside the Sistine Chapel, and again, as I was saying, this is to prevent any kind of interference from the outside world, and the security for this one was heavy, so they closed the Sistine Chapel several days before. So that they could, prepare the space, but not just prepare it with tables and chairs and to put in, the famous stoves for the black smoke, but also to sweep it for security. So, they swept it for bugs, listening devices, and I think this is the first time ever they actually put in jamming devices as well.
Oh, gosh, yeah.
I think I heard from some of my colleagues in Rome that you couldn't get any mobile phone reception within Vatican City at all, not just the Sistine Chapel.
Yeah, no, it was absolutely true. Very, very frustrating for me.
Yeah, the Vatican went dark.
Yeah, because remember, we would be going down there. So, I mean, just for you guys to know, because of the team that I'm working with, how great these guys are doing such a great job. We've been around the clock being there because it's such a momentous time to be in Rome. And, we were there before, when the Pope passed away, then we were there for the funeral procession. I wanted to really make sure that we had guys taking photographs and filming, because the last time it was, very, very long time. I think it was, was it Leo XIII who was the last Pope? Or no, yeah, it was Leo. I think he was the last Pope buried outside of the Vatican.
He's buried in John Lateran, but he's the last pope to be buried outside.
Exactly.
Vatican City.
Yeah, and so I thought that, someone said they're going to do on foot this processional. It was like the Pope mobile where they were taking Francis's body very quickly through the city. I thought there was, because I'm theatrical and I love the pomp and circumstance, and we always read and study about these processionals that took place in Rome, a city processionals. But it was very quick. But we had people stationed around filming it, so that we would put that on our social media channels so people can still be a part of it, even if they weren't in Rome. And then we were going, like I said, Connor was there at the first conclave. I came in the second one in the morning. I got there right at the perfect time. I thought I was going to be waiting. I think you had written, it was like they were going to announce between 12 and 2 when the smoke would come out, and at 11:55 the smoke came out. So it was great. And then when the white smoke came out, I was walking towards the piazza right when it happened. Then I had to line up, and that was amazing too, because just so everybody knows, Rachel and I were both there when Pope Francis was elected under the pouring rain. We got there, we went down at night, because I think it was April or
no, it's March 13th. It was the day after my dad's birthday. I remember being on the phone to him.
Yeah, exactly. So it was March 13th, but then you could just run into the piazza. This year, you had to go through the metal detectors to get in, which was kind of like, holy moly. And the second you walked into the piazza, you lost all signal. You couldn't get any signal. So it was like, we were all trying to communicate with each other. We're like, all right, guys, we're going in. We're going to disappear. We'll come back out later.
Yeah, conclave is definitely the analog as opposed to the digital world.
Yeah, exactly. So, so they're in there and they have this. Now, remember that we have, people often wonder when you go into the chapel itself, where is they call it the chimney, and when it really isn't a chimney, it's kind of a stovepipe. Yeah,
it's two stoves, in fact. So there's, and it's, if you've got your back at the very, very back of the Sistine Chapel and you're looking towards the main altar, they put the two stoves just to the left-hand side, okay, just below the last window on the left-hand side of the Sistine Chapel, and they place two stoves there. One is used to burn the papal ballots, and the other then emanates the black or the white smoke.
There we go. So it's one on the black or the, so they burn the ballots and then emanates the smoke. Okay. And remember that, I always remember that it was, dry hay would give off the white smoke, and the black smoke was if the hay was wet.
In theory, because it didn't always work.
Exactly. So people would get very, very confused. And, in 2005, literally, I was giving a tour, a private tour That was a lot of things at first, when John Paul II passed away, because we walked out. We didn't go into the chapel, obviously, but we were allowed to go to the Raphael rooms and then the Sobieski room with the largest painting in the Vatican museums. The windows were covered. They were covered with like this opaque plastic. So it's like you were not allowed to look. I remember this very distinctly, to look at the chapel itself, because you can normally see the chapel from the outside in that room, and they covered it. And the museums were empty, which was wonderful.
Yeah.
And then we went out, and I was gesturing to it, and then the smoke came out. But it was true. It was like, it was like, I had read about this in When in Rome, a book by, I think the author's name was Robert Hutchins. He was a guy who lived in Rome, like us, expat. A lot of great stories in it. And, it was like a little white, black, so people were not
murky, kind of gray.
Yeah, exactly. But this time it was very white. It was very clear for people. So, there was no confusion now that they use this.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, they reverted to modern technology. So they put like little smoke bombs basically inside the stove, to make sure that there's no confusion whatsoever.
When I started through Trinity Tours, the goal was simple: help people experience places, not just see them. Because standing in front of the Sistine Chapel, or walking through the Uffizi, or exploring the Colosseum, it means so much more than when someone brings it to life for you. That's what we do. Our guides are passionate experts. Our itineraries are built for curious travelers. Whether it's Rome, Florence, Venice, Through Trinity Tours is for people who want to connect, learn, and remember what they saw long after the plane ride home.
So from the moment that happens, right, everyone kind of goes into the piazza, and you had this time, I think it was a while. It was about an hour and a half before they came out. But I mean, it's still filled with pomp and circumstance, because you have the Swiss Guard come through the piazza, and there's like music playing, and then they go up and they march up on top of into the facade, or the steps. So they're in front of the facade of St. Peter's. So if you're looking at the church, they're on the left. And then the Carabinieri also come up, which I thought was interesting. And they have a band, and they have the music playing, and it's like a marching band almost. And they go up, and then they're standing there on guard. And then finally, of course, we had the famous terminology, it's the Chamberlain, the Camerlengo, who comes out and says, "Habemus Papa."
It's actually the cardinal protodeacon is actually.
Oh, that's right, because you said the Chamberlain is not a cardinal, right? You said he was a bishop.
No, the Chamberlain, the Camerlengo is a cardinal. His name is Kevin Farrell from Ireland.
He's Irish,
incidentally. But no, he doesn't actually announce the "Habemus Papam," we have a pope, so it's a different cardinal. He does that.
The one who's in charge of
he's the cardinal protodeacon, and I cannot remember his name now to save my life.
Okay.
But he's the one who kind of is his official job is to say, we've got a pope. But yeah, it takes about an hour to get to that point, which makes sense because the cardinal, Prevost in this case, he discovers that he's elected to the papacy. He's still wearing his cardinal's robes.
That's right.
So he has to change a name. He has to go get changed. And of course, he does that just off the Sistine Chapel.
In the Chamber of Tears.
Yeah, the Room of the Tears, which is a very poignant name for the room, because they say, when the newly elected Pope enters inside this room, the weight of his new office kind of finally dawns on him, and he sheds tears.
Yes, that's true. I mean, I don't know if you saw on the cameras, but it did seem that Pope Leo XIV was quite moved to almost be at the point of tears a few times.
Yeah, I looked pretty overwhelmed, but I remember Francis looking really overwhelmed as well. I remember, when he came out, he was just like, "Brothers and sisters, good evening." And
yeah, I remember that, because he said, "You've gone to the furthest ends of the world to find your Pope."
But like it's got to be a pretty overwhelming experience, as you put on the white papal cassock for the first time, and and hope it fits.
Yeah, exactly, because that was a big debate too, right? What is it? We had a couple of posts that we did on our platforms, because there was the rumor had it that Gamarelli, which was a place that many of us tour guides we would show near the Pantheon, in an area that was kind of what I always call the garment district for the clergy, and you could buy reliquaries and whatnot. And this, although the shops are closing now, not as many as they used to be, Gamarelli was always there, and it had the white cap to kind of denote that they were the tailor of the Pope. But then all of a sudden it came out that these guys are no longer the tailor of the Pope, or the rumor was that Francis wanted them to recycle the papal robe. So we did that, but then a new story came out that there's a new, well, not a new, but a different tailor, which was used by Pope Benedict XVI and Francis.
I think, used him as well. So yeah, I mean, there were so many rumors flying about in the few days before Conclave started about all sorts of things, because, you know, not all of this information was being transparently shared. So we know that, you know, Gammarelli, this particular tailor, you know, is the traditional tailor to provide the 3 sizes of cassocks that are put inside the Room of the Tears that the new Pope will wear on the balcony of St. Peter's. But it was really interesting because after Francis died, they just had the white zucchetto, his little white skull cap, in the window. And, you know, people were like, well, when are we going to see the 3 outfits in the window of Gammarelli? Because normally they put them in the window.
Oh, I didn't know that. They put them in the window. Wow.
In the window for a couple of days before they're actually kind of, you know, sent off to the Sistine Chapel, because they make them in 3 sizes. It's, you know, small, medium, and large, hopefully to fit whichever cardinal becomes elected. And then, yeah, these rumors started circulating that, oh, maybe Gammarelli won't be providing the cassocks for the new Pope, you know, in the Room of the Tears. But we weren't getting a lot of information. And then we found out from Gammarelli they hadn't been asked to produce them.
Yes.
They didn't know whether they were going to be recycled, the old ones, or if a new tailor had been chosen. So it turns out, yeah, a new tailor was chosen, and he's down in the Borgo, so right beside the Vatican, didn't have to travel far.
Mancinelli, right?
Mancinelli, yeah, and he's been producing papal clothing since like the 60s.
Wow.
You know, so yeah, he knows what he's doing.
Yeah, today I'm going to be putting up a carousel about it, that I have like the photos, because I went there the day the Pope was elected in the morning, and I took a photograph. It was so funny because it was just, you know, when these stories happen, it was filled with journalists and cameras, and so I had to try to take a moment when these guys weren't there to take a photograph of it. And then I went inside, took some videos and stuff, so we'll see about it. But what was really funny is then I went into the piazza and I saw, because of course when you go to the piazza during a conclave, it's like a who's who in the clergy, and the fascinating, beautiful vestments that they have, the nuns, the priests, all the different clothes that they're wearing. And there were 2 guys that had 2 bags. There were 2 priests, not just guys. There were 2 priests who were holding bags of the Mancinelli, and it was written Mancinelli. I was like, okay, so this is going to be the place where everyone's going to want to get their clothes now from there. And it was a small, beautiful, quaint shop. It's so funny because, you know, I never really noticed it that much. Going down the Via Borgo, which is a place very near St. Peter's Basilica, where when you're taking clients around, this is a place where you may want to stop for lunch. So it's kind of touristy, but very beautiful. It's very quaint.
It's really charming.
Yeah, I believe Ian lived there for a while.
Yeah, I think his first apartment was like right down in the Borgo, like almost opposite the Passetto, you know, like the big wall that goes between St. Peter's and Castel San Angelo. So, but yeah, no, it's a really charming neighborhood. Yes, it's a bit touristic, but it's also, you know, it's definitely worth a walk around. And, you know, if it's good enough for the cardinals, it's good enough for you. You know, there's a couple of restaurants there that apparently are famous in the days leading up to Conclave, because, you know, it's where the cardinals gather and they dinners together, and, you know, all sorts of things are being discussed.
That's right. I mean, that's the other thing now. Apparently, you know, it's like so secretive, the whole conclave, but then a lot of these cardinals are now being chatty Cathys, and they're talking about stuff about how the elections went on and whatnot. So, you know, just to wrap this up, I mean, it's been so much. I mean, we're just scratching the surface, because
absolutely,
this is really interesting, and, you know, a lot of great politics. And what's also very funny is that, you know, now we're learning more about Leo the 14th, and it's like so funny because so many things are investigated, like, you know, scrutinized in a positive way about, like, from what he said, what he chose to wear. Now he has chosen, because Francis decided to live in the dormitories that the cardinals were were living in during the conclave, which was built by John Paul II for them.
Yeah.
He lived there in, it's like the Casa Santa Marta.
Casa Santa Marta, yeah. So it was built in 96 by John Paul II.
Yeah, I didn't realize it was so close to St. Peter's. It was so funny. I always thought it was like in the back, but I mean, you were giving tours as a Vatican guide of the gardens and stuff, so you knew exactly where.
Yeah, we used to drive past it all the time. I used to occasionally see his little white Pope car drive past us as well, which was quite cool. You know, it's because he was living in the Casa Santa Marta, but his office was still in the Apostolic Palaces, which you can see from down in St. Peter's Square. So he used to commute just like everybody else.
So now, but Leo XIV, he was there on video when they cut open the ribbon and reopened the papal apartments. So he's like, you know, no way, I'm going to be doing that. You know, what's an interesting thing? I don't know what he will do, because Francis, and I hope they'll continue this, but Francis decided to open the papal gardens at Castel Gandolfo for the public. Did you give tours there, or did you ever see it? Because it's one of the most amazing gardens.
No, I actually haven't given tours there. It's definitely on my list for the next time I am back in town. The last time we were in town was in winter, so you know the gardens weren't gonna be looking at
it's stunning. It's really, they're like some, I mean, so I imagine that they're still going to be open, but maybe Leo XIV will change his mind and want them closed off. But the gardens are stunning. They were built on the ruins of the Villa of Domitian's summer palace area, and it's just like, you know, it's on the top end of a crater of the volcano. So it's like that's now a crater lake. So one side you see the lake, and then on a clear day you can see the ocean. Oh, so beautiful, so beautifully curated.
They will keep them open unless Leo wants to spend some time there during the summer, which is what Benedict used to do.
Yeah.
So it might be open and then maybe sometimes closed. But I'm sure we'll find out.
I'm sure we'll find out, but it's definitely worthwhile a visit. And also the Vatican farms and all that kind of stuff too, which I love. You know, they used to have Vatican milk from the Vatican farms, but they don't
I know. And it's lovely because it's got the papal crest on it.
I know, but they stopped doing it. I went back because I was like, can I get a photo of that? But they're like, oh, we don't have that anymore. And I'm like,
oh, wait. Oh, you spent my favorite joke.
Holy cow.
You get holy milk from holy cows.
Holy milk from holy cows. Exactly. The jokes that we use as tour guides to work our stories.
We work hard.
Anyway, Rachel, thank you so much. This was so wonderful, and I'm sure you and I will be having more conversations because there's just so many cool things to talk about when we're talking about history and Italy and Europe in general. But of course, with us, what's close to our hearts is Rome, because that's where we have been living in for a very, very long time.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a blast. I've enjoyed talking.
Pleasure for me as well. And ciao for now.
Ciao for now. Talk soon.